takeaways from Jeffrey Lurie's State of the Eagles address at owners' meetings. We've got Les Bowen in studio. Very excited for this show. Back after this on the PHLY Eagles podcast. Welcome in, everybody, to the PHLY Eagles podcast, live from the Xfinity studio on a Wednesday afternoon, and we are presented by our friends at Ashley and Bet365. I am your host today, EJ Smith, back in town, back home after a red-eye flight in Phoenix. Had a good time at the owners' meetings, and I'm very excited to be joined by, I've given you your flowers on the show a couple of times, a real mentor of mine, a friend of mine, and I think a Jeffrey Lurie whisperer, I would say, which is why I'm very excited to do the show with you. Without further ado, the great Les Bowen. I appreciate you joining us today. How you doing?
I'm doing great, EJ. How are you?
I'm doing well. I don't sleep great on planes, but I was tired enough that I think I got a decent amount of sleep. And I feel like energized by all the Eagles news that we have going on today. So a lot to get to. I'm excited to trade some takeaways on Jeffrey Lurie with you later on the show, but I think we need to definitely start with the Jalen Hurts conversation. There was a big story I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen about Jalen Hurts in ESPN, written by Tim McManus and Jeremy Fowler, about, I think the general gist of the story is Jalen Hurts' culpability in the limitations that the Eagles offense had last year, and a sentiment that he is uncoachable. They talked to probably about a dozen people around the Eagles organization. I think that there were some anecdotes about the difficulty of being, in the room with Jalen and trying to install an offensive system. So, I think there's a lot to get to with that. I guess what was your general takeaway?
Yeah, kind of like that. I wasn't quite as strong on it being strictly on Jalen. It seemed to me most of the quotes came from someone who had some sort of coaching role with the Eagles last year, which should be a very limited number of people. And oddly enough, they came off, the coaching staff came off very well in the piece. It was even suggested that it was just the media making Kevin Patullo look like a bad offensive coordinator, and that somehow the players were affected by this, which, but, the sequence in there that struck me the most was the talk about the doomed last play against the 49ers, and supposedly it was Jalen Hurts who suggested 4 verts in that situation. This source, who, again, has to be a coach, it's either a coach or Tanner McKee, and I don't think it's Tanner McKee.
Which surprised me,
because those are the only people in this little circle that were having this conversation, unless it was somebody on the headphones, maybe in the press box, who was listening to this conversation.
Sure.
So it's Jalen Hurts who says that they should do 4 verts, even though they've just done 4 verts. And this source says, oh, no, we can't do – no, thinks, oh, no, we can't do 4 verts, but doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
And then this is Jalen Hurts' fault when this doesn't work. Well, if you're a coach in that situation, you don't have to do what it seemed like, and I think this is said in the story, that Jalen was asked for. He didn't go over and say, we need to run 4 verts.
Right.
Hey, listen to me.
Certainly look at his mannerisms in that moment and at least infer that whatever was said, he wasn't feeling incredibly confident about whatever the call was.
And it was free. I think Nick or Kevin or whomever was free to say, that's a great idea, but how about we do this instead?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So reading through the story, and we should make this the What's Brewing segment presented by Wawa, because this was my biggest takeaway reading through the story. It took me back to a conversation I had during the Super Bowl about Jalen Hurts, and it was somebody who has worked closely with Jalen for years, has known Jalen for a long time, and I asked them about the perception that Jalen is hard to coach, difficult to get to do certain things, and limited a limiting factor for the offensive system, right? And the thing that this person told me is that whenever Jalen is introduced to a new thing, whether it's a system or a drill or anything in that he's working on that's very detail oriented or process driven, he really needs to understand the why behind it. Yeah. There's a real level of taking a step back and trying to get to the bottom of what is the purpose of what we are doing. And I think it's a very human, relatable thing that everyone can apply to their own lives, right? We've all been in a situation where somebody suggests something to us that we maybe aren't receptive to, and you try to understand where the other person's coming from. And if you don't think it's a good idea, you might push back on it. Probably also all been in a situation where we tell someone, hey, I think this should happen, and they give you a hard time,
right?
And you're frustrated by it. And I think when I read through the story, I think that the sentiment that is in that story, clearly the coaching staff grew frustrated. It was reported in the story. By the way, we should mention great reporting from Tim McManus and Jeremy Fowler. None of what we are going to say on the show is to undermine what they're reporting.
Right.
It's solid reporting. I think it does offer a window into a lot of things that you hear. And it was reported in that story that Kellen Moore and Jalen Hurts had friction. And if you look at Kellen Moore's offenses over the years and the offense that he ran with the Eagles, it would track with the fact that he had to meet Jalen Hurts, maybe even not even in the middle, more toward Jalen's side of things. So,
and the story does a good job of pointing out that Super Bowl offense, everybody sort of, because they blew out the Commanders and the Chiefs in the playoffs, everyone sort of forgets that was built around one of the most incredible running offenses that has ever existed in the NFL. And the Eagles really were not a productive passing team, not as productive as they should have been.
Right.
And we spent much of the season before the playoffs lamenting that, and then it kind of all got, no, everything, what a great team, greatest team ever.
Yeah.
I do think that's right. And in what you were saying about Jalen, there's a point in there in the story where the point is made that from Jalen's perspective, he spent the whole offseason getting ready to run the offense that they'd been running.
Yeah.
And then when things didn't go great, suddenly they wanted to make all these changes, and he wasn't maybe clear on exactly what you were saying.
Right. Yeah, the reason behind it.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And to me, that is, I could see both sides of this, because from a coaching perspective, you might be frustrated saying, we told Jalen we need to do X, Y, and Z, and he was not receptive to it. He needed us to explain it. He puts up walls. That might be frustrating from a coaching perspective, but from Jalen's perspective, you can understand if you, to me, I think it is maybe reflective of, did they do a good enough job explaining to him why they wanted to do what they wanted to do? And I think how much burden of proof they needed to show for what they wanted to implement, that is where I think this disconnect comes from. And honestly, it's going to be different person to person. So to me, that is really, and I saw you post this on social media. I thought this was a great point that we're going to be doing a lot of both things can be true today with Jalen.
Yes.
And I think that the stubbornness that he can show, the conviction in what he's doing, and what he does, I think that is part of what makes him great. It also is what part of makes him, it's part of what earns him the uncoachable label, right? The label that it is difficult that it can be difficult to work with at times.
Well, and the steely demeanor is similar. You want your quarterback to be a tough, really hard to knock off his game kind of guy. But sometimes if you have a really tough, steely personality, teammates, don't. It's not like you're Mr. Rogers, around the locker room. And I wonder how much of this is true for other quarterbacks. I think a great deal of it probably is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you can go into have these sort of in-depth views into a lot of different situations. Aaron Rodgers, for example. To me, saying that Jalen Hurts has limitations and that he needs to change some things isn't really revelatory. Well, that sounds like I'm diminishing the story. It's nothing that we didn't sense.
I think it's you diminishing the reaction to the story, which I completely agree with.
Thank you. Yep. Yeah,
the reporting
very well
is solid.
Yes.
The reporting is a lot of stuff that you have heard about Jalen in pieces and whispers, and this is the most comprehensive look at what we've been alluding to for a long time. So the story is great. The story is very solid, but again, I think the reaction has been more about people not necessarily like reading between the lines and seeing it for what it was beforehand. So yeah, I get where you're coming from with that.
There's a segment of the fan base that, well, there are two segments that I disagree with. One is the segment on one side that is, okay, Jalen Hurts was the MVP of the Super Bowl, therefore he is as great a quarterback as there is in the NFL, and we should never criticize anything he does, which just isn't true. As a passer and a field general, he is not Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow.
Right.
That doesn't mean he's not any good.
Yeah.
The other group on the other side is a group that, some of it is the people that whenever you have a black quarterback, you get these people. There are people who insist that he's a bum, he's a fraud, he's terrible. They won these games in spite of him, blah, blah, blah. That's not true either.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think so that is it is an important thing to keep in mind too, is like the fact that there are people who are critical of Jalen because he is a black quarterback. Yeah. And that is like, there are bad faith actors on that side of the argument. There is a nuance in him as a quarterback that is tricky to navigate because of the fact that you've got those bad faith actors. But
I went through this with Donovan McNabb.
Yeah, absolutely.
And early in his career, I was an incredibly staunch defender of Donovan McNabb just because of that, just because of the people that I heard from. We just had email back then. We didn't have social media.
Yeah.
The people I heard from were racist. I mean, they were not being honest about what they didn't like.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But Donovan, much like Jalen, was a complex figure. He wasn't all good. He ended up not having the career he should have had, frankly.
Yeah.
And some of that was his fault.
Absolutely.
But, yes, nuance. Yes.
Yeah, which is what we bring here.
Yeah.
That's going to do it for the What's Brewing segment presented by Wawa. Les, we have acknowledged this a little bit, and this is one of the big takeaways I wanted to get to in this Jalen discussion, which is I feel like across the NFL in general, but especially in Philadelphia, there's a tendency to deify the franchise quarterback and treat them as a perfect figure until they're not. And then once they're not perfect, there's a tendency to tear them back down. And I think, I don't know who needs to hear this. It might be Eagles fans. It honestly might be people in the Eagles building based off of this story. That this is not a productive way to do business with your franchise quarterback. One of the big things that jumped out to me reading this story and honestly covering the team for the last year or two is how many people in that building have these strong feelings about Jalen Hurts. And I'm not saying that they created this problem themselves. I want to make sure I acknowledge that Jalen Hurts has accountability in this. But the tendency to build these guys up, put them on a pedestal, give them that franchise quarterback mantle, only to watch them win a Super Bowl, watch them struggle the next season, and tear them down and say that they are the reason for everything wrong with the organization. I do think that is just like a vicious cycle that we're seeing, and I think it is unproductive.
Well, I'll go back again. I'm Mr. History here, but Carson Wentz, did not win the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
He was there when they won the Super Bowl. But when all that criticism erupted of him in the subsequent years, I'll always remember this. One of the big criticisms from a teammate was that he tried to come back too fast from that knee injury.
Yeah.
Well, what the hell? I mean, really?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah. He cares too much. Right? Yeah.
He wanted to get back out there. What a jackass. You know? I mean, Wentz had a lot of many more failings than Jalen Hurts, but I wondered the same thing at the time. The people that are pushing him out of the building here, could this have gone another way? Could they have, maybe handled this a little better and salvaged that enormous potential that guy once had?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not, because his injuries eventually took those abilities away from him. But
but to see the cycle repeat itself with
Jalen
is alarming.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not overly surprising because I can tell you that there were people in that building who were unhappy with the framing that Kevin Patullo was the sole problem for the Eagles offense and was the preeminent reason the offense struggled. I can understand from an outsider's perspective, you look at the fact that the Eagles returned 10 of 11 starters on offense. It was the most expensive offense in the NFL. For them to be 20th in points scored with that group, and Kevin Patullo being the main change that from the season before when they had a historic rushing attack, you can understand why people pointed at Kevin Patullo. And obviously, actions speak louder than words. The Eagles have not overhauled their personnel on offense to this point in the offseason. They've overhauled the coaching staff. But I can tell
They'll have a new slot receiver. That's it. Except for the A.J. Brown business, which remains to be.
There's still time. As Howie Roseman would say, it's April 1st. There's plenty of time. They don't play a game next week. That's his favorite saying with this time of year. But I do think that the fact that there was so much discontent with the way that Kevin Patullo was painted on his way out, it didn't surprise me that there was this sentiment to kind of make sure that Jalen Hurts was held accountable for it as well. Right.
That's a very good point. I had not really thought of it in those terms, but that's an excellent point. To me, though, I mean, I was all in with let's get rid of Kevin Patullo, but what really happened last year, John McMullen, John, made a really good point to me late in the season. He said, when Saquon Barkley ran for 2,005 yards, we worried about Saquon getting worn down.
Yeah.
What actually happened was we wore down the offensive line to a nub.
Yeah. You might have heard that on this show, too, for the record.
Oh, yeah. But that was the first time I heard it was from him.
Yeah.
I don't know if they could have had a successful offense last season.
Yeah. And I think, to that point, one of my big takeaways from the owners' meetings was Nick Sirianni's press conference. Whenever he was asked about building out the new system, building camaraderie with the new coaching staff, and having Jalen Hurts as a big part of that conversation, and his answers all went back to needing a break, needing a reset, getting away from everything. And I've heard that sentiment a lot this offseason, that the mental strain of having the truncated offseason, the physical, the physical toll on the offensive line, the attrition.
21 games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're seeing now that they are trying to get that reset. So no, it's an excellent point. And I think all of these things wrap up into what happened with the Eagles on offense.
Right.
It's not as simple as saying it was Jalen Hurts being the limiting factor, or Kevin Patullo, or the injuries. It was, it was in the aggregate. And I think when you read the story, it obviously does make you feel like, okay, this was all a Jalen production. But I think, again, this is where all these things can be true at the same time. It's a bigger picture than that.
Yeah, I think we've had two seasons where the offense, it was 2023 and this last season, when the offense really foundered. And I think Jalen got really frustrated both years.
Yeah.
But I think that's what happens when things don't go well. People do get frustrated.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, we're going to take our first break. On the other side, I want to talk about what this really means for the Eagles. It's obviously, you have a big reaction when a story like this comes out, but I want to talk to Les about the outcomes that we think might happen based off of a story like this. So let us know what you think in the chat, and we'll be right back in a couple seconds. What if you could have reliable and intelligent Wi-Fi? And what if you could keep it at the same price for 5 whole years? That's the Xfinity 5-year price guarantee. It's Wi-Fi that makes everything in your home work together. It finds and fixes problems before you even notice them. It's like super intelligent Wi-Fi with a sixth sense. And that lets you stream the game even when the whole family is online. Just picture it. All your devices working in perfect harmony for 5 whole years. And here's my favorite part. No annual contracts, no hidden fees, and Xfinity's best equipment already included in the deal. Take it from me, a lot can change in 5 years. Championships are won, records are broken, dreams grow bigger, but your Wi-Fi, that should stay reliable, and the price should stay put. Lock in your price today and unlock the possibilities with Xfinity. Learn more at xfinity.com. Xfinity, imagine that. Select plans only, restrictions apply.
Do you have people in your life who, anytime you hear about something, anything it is, they're thinking that's an opportunity to go make some money? Well, in your life, AirDNA is here to help you take advantage of the World Cup, because AirDNA is the leader in data on short-term rentals like Airbnbs, and they just released a free calculator so you can see how much you can make renting your home out during the World Cup. Occupancy already up 200% for the group stage matches, and we are still months out. This is a once-in-a-lifetime tourism event driving this demand, so don't sit on the sidelines and take advantage of your opportunity to rake in some cash. Think about the brand new patio you want, season tickets, epic vacation, whatever it is. You could even go to the World Cup with the money you're going to make. All you got to do is go to airdna.co/Eagles and look into it, because this is your chance.
All right, we are back on the PHLY Eagles podcast. So, Les, I think there are at least two big ripple effects that I would expect from this, or at least one big ripple effect and one I'm going to pour cold water on a lot of this discussion. But the first ripple effect I want to talk about is something that I actually wrote about at the end of the season, which is the dual-sided nature of what Jalen Hurts has become in the Eagles locker room. Mm-hmm. Because I wrote a story at the end of the year about this version of Jalen Hurts that more people were starting to see, a more outward version of Jalen Hurts, a more accessible, open version of Jalen, who has often, I think Tim put it in the story, that has often been portrayed as having a force field around him. I think he's made an effort to be less standoffish probably isn't the right word, but less detached from the team. But it's funny because you saw pieces written after mine that would suggest the opposite.
Yeah.
And I would never refute the other side of it because I think it really depends on who you talk to.
Who you talk to, yes.
I remember telling
there are a lot of people in locker rooms.
Exactly. A lot of people in that building, right? And I remember telling our viewers at the time, it's like, you read my story, you can see who I talk to. Jordan Mailata, Brandon Graham, Saquon Barkley, Devontae Smith. Mm-hmm. I talk to you can see who I talk to. And I'm not discrediting if it's anonymous sources because obviously it's a sensitive topic. But there's enough people where there can be different, diverging viewpoints on this. But I do think this more outward version of Jalen, this more open version of Jalen, I think we're going to see that more and more because a story like this, Jalen doesn't indulge like the public discourse very often, but I think we've seen him at times acknowledge when that discourse is sparked by a sentiment inside the Jefferson Health Complex. Yeah. And I think this is an obvious one that will be on his radar. And he's been, at least for me, I've always known him to be somebody who doesn't play the game.
Right.
I think he's going to start playing the game more. I think he kind of has to at this point.
That's interesting. I had not thought of that.
Yeah.
But it'll be very interesting to see if he has a reaction to this and what that reaction is. My takeaway from this piece, I was just kind of thinking this through in my head. This piece, and Jeff McClain, our former colleague, also wrote a piece. Basically, both pieces are saying the way forward depends a lot on Jalen Hurts and how he adapts to all this change. Which got me thinking, and I'm writing something that I hope to have posted eventually tonight, but I don't want to step too much on my writing. But I'll give you a little preview.
A deadline, right?
Yeah. So they're going to make all these changes, and what happens if these changes aren't what they hope?
Yeah.
If the result isn't what they're hoping for, do you just sort of sit Sean Mannion in a corner and go back to what you did before with Saquon Barkley and hope that with a good offensive line, with a healthy offensive line, that you have success again and just sort of keep, okay, this is who we are, screw it? Or do you start thinking about Jalen Hurts at that point and what's the way forward? And Jeffrey Lurie was asked about a contract for Hurts. He signed through 2028, and it doesn't seem to be a front burner issue, but where are they going to be with Jalen Hurts if this doesn't work? How much is it going to – there are already people in the building that, have questions and frustrations. How will it be perceived if this offensive reset isn't everything we all want it to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the moves the Eagles have made on the coaching staff and really on the offensive side in terms of personnel – not necessarily moves, but having Lane Johnson back, signing Dallas Goedert back, Landon Dickerson returning after, reportedly considering retirement. Their offensive personnel is not going to change. I think the two people that this is really going to fall at the feet of, a newsflash, it's going to be Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. I think that the way that this offseason has played out so far really places an onus and a clear it presents a clarity on what those two guys can do, or it will come down to their performances in a way where there won't be excuses for them if it doesn't go well. So I completely agree. This is where I pour cold water on it all, though. So almost 12 hours ago, I was sitting in a news conference where Jeffrey Lurie was addressing the state of the Eagles. Mm-hmm. And you'll often hear from people that Jeffrey Lurie is Jalen Hurts' biggest fan in the building. Yep. And with all of this noise that surrounds Jalen Hurts, the fact that the most important member in that organization will go to bat for him is the trump card, the end all be all, right? Jeffrey Lurie affirmed that yesterday.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read you the quote. He says, "There's no bigger fan of Jalen than me. Clutch gene, absolutely. The guy was the Super Bowl MVP 13 months ago. Should have been the MVP of the Super Bowl right before that against the Kansas City Chiefs the first time. He's so dedicated. I think you probably know. Spend a lot of time with Jalen, as I do with most quarterbacks, and he's incredibly dedicated to the game, to winning, and being a huge winner. I love everything about him." So to me, that is a perfect window into one of the most important parts of this dynamic with Jalen internally.
That's, I agree with you totally. But I always keep in the back of my mind, and I've brought this up before.
Yeah.
2015.
Okay.
So Lurie demoted Howie Roseman, almost his second son. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of media stuff going into the season about Chip Kelly. Trey Thomas left the coaching staff and implied that Chip was a racist. Deshaun Jackson had a lot to say about being traded. Jeffrey Lurie called us together on the practice field before the season started and gave a fire and brimstone sermon about what a great leader and a fine man Chip Kelly was, and how his door was always open, and Chip was just, everything that Jeffrey ever wanted in a football coach, and blah, 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 blah. And the next time we heard from Jeffrey was late December.
When he
a few days before the season finale, which he couldn't even wait for to fire Chip Kelly.
Yeah.
Things change.
I was going to say it only takes one major swing for that to break. That is a good point, especially with Jeffrey Lurie. Like, I think all Eagles fans would agree he's one of the best owners in the NFL, but he's not somebody who sits on his hands when he thinks it's time to act. So that's a fair observation. Absolutely.
Jalen's not Chip Kelly, and you really are not going to have to read my damn story after this, because it's
I think
said the whole thing here.
Mediums.
But Jalen Hurts has won a Super Bowl. He has a much longer rope than Chip Kelly had, but Jeffrey says things that he thinks. My point about Jeffrey is, he thought he needed to say that about Chip at that moment to keep things together. It wasn't what he believed. It was what he thought he needed to say at that moment. And I always keep that in mind, with these guys. You're not hearing their innermost thoughts sometimes.
Yeah, this one I feel like does underscore what the sentiment has been, though, about the fact that Jeffrey and Jalen, Jeffrey is Jalen's biggest admirer. Jeffrey was part of the organization when they missed out on Russell Wilson. Yep. And a lot of times you'll hear Jalen was like the making up for that missed draft pick. Yep. And now it's ironic because their careers do resemble each other's in certain ways, and the way that they are covered. I think one thing I wanted to hit on that we mentioned earlier, I do think that Jalen's race plays a big part in this, but I don't think you can be as reductive to say that's the only reason that this is happening. Because what you just said about Carson Wentz earlier in the show, this is an Eagles thing. Yeah. This is something that has happened enough times in this organization where I think it is bigger than, I think it's a bigger thing than Jalen's race. I think it's a product of the market, the intensity in the building. And a lot of these things are like what makes Philadelphia special. It's what makes the Eagles a successful organization, but it's a double-edged sword.
Well, I was thinking of you guys out there in Arizona. I always loved covering those meetings out there. The thing that was always the most interesting to me was the coaches' breakfast. They have the NFC one day and then the AFC the next day. So you go to the NFC coaches' breakfast and you look at, let's see, what's a what's an NFC team that isn't very prominent? The Arizona Cardinals table. And there's the coach, and there's a guy from the website that works for the team, and then there's a reporter if they're lucky. Yeah. And they're just sort of sitting there for an hour, talking about fishing or something. You go to the Eagles table, and there's like jugglers and balloons and 75 people.
Yes.
And,
we've been there since 5:30 a.m.
Yeah. People are getting there at 5:30 to get a seat, and they're like, I never wanted a seat, because if you're in a seat, unless you're sitting next to the coach, you're just like
crammed in there.
You're not any better. You can walk around and get in his ear, but anyway, my point is, which I got way away from.
Well, let me just say, I was team content. I got there early so I could get the footage for PHLY.
You have to get video.
So,
I never had to get video. But thank God. But but it's just such a different atmosphere and such a different focus here than most places in the NFL. This is I heartily believe. You got New York, you got Chicago and LA, but this is the big market where pro football means the most.
Yeah. I mean, and that is part of what makes it special.
Yeah.
So, again, it's not the type of thing where it's not an outright negative. I wouldn't even call it a negative. But it is a
complicating factor.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it really is telling that somebody like Jalen Hurts, who has been through a lot of adversity, and has played at Alabama, where I would say the scrutiny is probably even higher, can still get wrapped up into these types of things, because of the way that it can be here. Which, again, it's something I enjoy as somebody who talks about the Eagles every day. The last thing I wanted to say about the Hurts thing, I guess I've got two things. The penultimate thing I wanted to say about the Hurts thing is, and it was something that Tim and Jeremy hit on in the story, is that Jalen often does respond well to adversity.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that this is, I thought you made a good point on social media about this being like not so much of like a sound the alarm on Jalen Hurts, just kind of a window into this is the latest adversity in Jalen Hurts' career, is overcoming some of the things that are being said about him internally.
Yeah, that's it. I think he will respond to that, certainly.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. I don't want to take this in a totally different direction, but if they get rid of A.J. Brown, are there no excuses for Jalen Hurts? I mean, what are they going to – this fascinates me, this whole trade scenario, because it's like almost like a fait accompli with everybody that covers the team. Well, clearly they're going to trade him. There's only one bidder as far as I know, and they don't seem inclined to meet Howie's price. So how is this going to happen, and how are the Eagles going to be as good or better in 2026 if they trade A.J. Brown? I understand that they'll have cap room going forward.
But it doesn't help the 2026
Which sounds like a wonderful thing in April. But in October, if they're losing a game 13-12.
Yeah, nobody's going to be saying, but the salary cap.
We've got that cap room.
Yeah, the cash savings. To me, so being out there, I feel like the Patriots are more willing to meet the lofty asking price than I would have expected. Maybe not the full asking price, but I mean, just the conversations I had, I feel like that future first and maybe a future third is more realistic than it was a few months ago, especially with some of the wide receiver trades that have happened since then. The question of how do the Eagles replace A.J. Brown is a fair one. I think if you're the Eagles, you're probably exploring the trade market to see what type of player you could bring in.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair to say that if they do trade A.J. Brown, which some people believe it's like a foregone conclusion, it's just a matter of when instead of if. If they do, it's a understandable and it's a good argument that they probably won't be a better team in 2026.
And nobody really talks to A.J. I mean, he'll show up on some podcast and say something, but that's the way of the world these days. That's the only way we got any comment from Jeff Stoutland was Nick Foles' podcast. But I just can't understand how this can't be put back together somehow. I have a hard time with that.
I'm not convinced that there's not a road back for him. I think that the asking price might get met. So we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see.
Yep.
It's going to be a holding pattern. So it's like, it's going to be the same conversation for a few months here. But anyway, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side, I'm going to give you my last take from Jeffrey Lurie's press conference on Jalen, and then we're going to trade some takeaways on Jeffrey Lurie's press conference. So we'll be back in a couple minutes. Let me know what you guys are thinking about the Jalen Hurts conversation in the chat, and we will see you in a few minutes. March means one thing. It's go time for college basketball and Major League Baseball. And at Elkin Chevrolet, it's go time for real deals. 3 brothers, 1 promise. They'll treat you like family and give you a deal that makes sense. Trucks? Oh, you know they've got them. SUVs? They've got those too. Payments that keep you in the game? Absolutely. It's Chevy Truck Month, and tax refunds are starting to hit. It's a great time for Philly sports fans to check out a new Chevy truck at Elkins. You can get up to $7,360 in bonus cash on a new Silverado 1500. I used to own a Silverado 1500. Great truck. And you can contact Elkin Chevrolet today and see if you qualify for additional offers. If you're thinking about making a move, make it to Elkin Chevrolet on Route 73 in Marlton. Elkin Chevrolet, real brothers, real deals, and a whole lot of honkin' good service. Elkin Chevrolet, together, let's drive. I'm not sure if you guys have heard, but there is a sweet mystery going on at your local Rita's. That's right, your local Rita's. For a limited time, you can get Peeps flavored Italian ice, and it comes with a tasty secret. Peeps ice is springtime sweet and deliciously mysterious. So be sure to stop by and try it at your local Rita's, and while you're there, try and guess the mystery flavor and on the Rita's website. And if you win, you can win free Rita's for a year. You know, I'm a big blue raspberry guy, but I mean, if I had free Rita's for a whole year, I probably would venture out to some of the more, out there flavors, or honestly probably default to the GOAT, which is mango. So just go to ritasIce.com/peeps, and if you guess the right flavor, you'll have a chance to win water ice for the whole year. Just make sure to get there before it's too late. Don't forget to download the Rita's app. New app users will get a free small gelati ice custard with their first purchase. Treat yourself to a scoop of happiness today. Be cool. Go to Rita's. All right, we are back on the PHLY Eagles show. So, Les, my true final takeaway is one of my takeaways from Jeffrey Lurie's press conference, which maybe you could argue actions speak louder than words, because as much as effusive as his praise was for Jalen Hurts, he was asked a question about Jalen Hurts being in a window for a contract extension.
Mm-hmm.
Let me be clear. He was asked a question about Jalen being in a window for a contract extension, and he assumed that the conversation was about Jalen Carter, which I think is very telling for as you put it, the fact that it's not on the front burner,
right?
A Jalen Hurts extension, and I'm not saying it should be, but I do think that is indicative of where they stand with the quarterback.
They want to see what happens this season.
Yep.
I think before they do another mega,
understandably so. I mean,
a deal that they can't get out from under for 5 years.
Yeah, they're going to be talking about $60 million plus annual. I mean, that's where Dak Prescott is right now at $60 million. So, anyway, so that was one of my takeaways. But I'm curious what your big takeaway was from Jeffrey Lurie's news conference last night.
Yeah, there was a lot of stadium talk.
Yeah.
I'm 70 years old. I might not be here by the time they get this stadium built. I think we're going to see one.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be 20 years from now.
Yeah.
It'll be 10 or maybe less.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it's going to be exactly, but it'll. Time does pass. I covered the opening of the Link, which doesn't seem that long ago, but really, they've been in the Link about as long as they were in the Vet before they started talking about getting a new stadium. Mm-hmm. And the Link was, the upkeep was horrible there. The Vet, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The Vet could have been a much better place than it was. Kansas City had, and still has, the same stadium that is much better. That the city just didn't take care of it. But nonetheless, the Vet was no more than 25 years old.
Yeah.
When people started, talking about new stadiums for the Phillies and the Eagles.
Right.
And, it took another 5 to 7 years to get those built. But, we're at that point. We really are.
Yeah. Now, I will not get on my soapbox again about the tradition in the NFL, really, like in American sports, of not just caring for a stadium and letting it grow old. And I'm romantic about those things. I won't get on my soapbox about it because I've done that enough on this show. But it did stand out to me as well that Jeffrey Lurie was non-committal about the location of the potential new stadium. I want to make sure we always say, like, potential new stadium. They could renovate the Link, which, again, would be up my alley. But, I thought I don't think it's necessarily like an indication that they're going to be elsewhere, like that they're going to leave the sports complex. But I did find it noteworthy that Jeffrey Lurie is, at least they're still early enough in the process where he's not going to close the door on a potential other location to swoop in and become a real player in this.
Well, real player, that's a really good way to put it, because I think what all these teams want is for South Jersey or somebody to make a bid, and then for Philadelphia to have to step up and
exactly. Yeah, I think that's the best case scenario, and that is why you don't say, "Oh, we'd love to stay at the sports complex." So, you know, I think that's probably a good explainer for like Eagles fans who are worried about that. You know, obviously, you know, as you know, Lindsay, shout out to Lindsay for flashing up the graphic of Jeffrey Lurie saying we'll do what's best for the fans. But I do think that is code for we are not going to commit to anything until we know who's going to be the most aggressive to keep us.
And at this point, I don't think Jeffrey's going to build another stadium that won't host a Super Bowl.
Yes. So I, as somebody who's romantic about stadiums, don't love the idea of the Eagles playing in a dome.
No, not a straight dome at all.
I think a retractable roof. Yeah, I think I think that's probably where he'll land based off of, he's talked before about how he loves weather games. Yeah. And it's an advantage. It is absolutely, I mean, the Eagles playing the Rams in the NFC playoffs 2 years ago should inform how much of an advantage it can be. So I would expect it to be a retractable roof, but I mean, it'll be very interesting to see where they end up with this. I take Jeffrey Lurie at his word. He said that they're still in the exploratory phase of this. They're studying stadiums worldwide. It's not just NFL stadiums. They're studying soccer stadiums in Barcelona and Madrid and, you know, all throughout Europe as well. And I think that there's probably a timeline. I think, you know, so Jeffrey Lurie said he hopes he'll have something more concrete next year. But I do think they're probably in a 7 to 8 year window where this is going to get done.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Yeah. One of my big takeaways from Jeffrey Lurie's news conference was actually what we mentioned earlier, Jalen Carter. So he mentioned that, you know, they don't talk about contract extensions with players. You know, obviously he's a great player. The fact that he was talking about Jalen Carter when everyone else was expecting him to talk about Jalen Hurts created some confusion. But when you listen back to what he said, I did find it very interesting that a follow-up question was asked of him, what do you think of the season that Jalen had? Yeah. Now he's thinking Jalen Carter, and he didn't really know what to say. He just went, good, you know. And, like, you know, again, I think it's understandable, the answer, because Jalen Carter did have an up-and-down season. He was hurt.
Yeah, he was hurt.
The whole time. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack with Jalen Carter's season. But I do think it's still telling because of the fact, I've said before on Jalen Carter and this extension speculation, the Eagles are typically very proactive in getting these deals done. I think the fact that it hasn't gotten done yet is an acknowledgement of how this is not a straightforward deal to do.
No.
I still would expect it to get done. I think Jalen Carter will reset the defensive tackle market. I think he is deserving of that based off his talent. But, yeah, I think that number is going to be tricky to agree on, especially with Drew Rosenhaus as Jalen Carter's agent. And I think that's probably why it's going to take a little bit longer.
Well, you have a guy who, you know, he hasn't done anything horrible since he got to the Eagles, but there are concerns about his maturity still, I think.
Yeah.
And they did expect him to become a dominant defensive player of the year type guy last season, and it didn't happen. Now, I really give him a pass there because of the injuries and because of the whole Super Bowl thing that we talked about.
Yeah.
Jordan Mailata didn't have a great year last year either, you know.
Yeah, sure.
That's just the way it goes sometimes when you're carrying a big load for a team that plays 21 games.
Right.
But it wasn't what they wanted, you know, and I think there's a little bit of concern there. It'll be interesting to see how that does work out. But, yeah, you're right. They'll end up giving him the money. But there's some ups and downs probably to go through before we get to that. I don't think it's going to be like tomorrow.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that they got Jordan Davis's extension done sooner, I think speaks to how that was a more straightforward decision.
Yes.
Maybe not entirely straightforward, but still a more straightforward decision. All right, what's your next takeaway from Lurie? Or do you want me to double up here?
I wish we saw this side of Jeffrey more often. He is still salty about the outcome of Super Bowl 59.
Yes, mentioned it at least 3 or 4
times.
Feels
it was stolen from them. The tush push. he made a joke about dialing down the effectiveness on purpose. You know, ha ha ha.
Yeah.
You know, there's a part of him that's like the fans, but you don't really get that sense of his personality very often.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it would. I mean, people love him because the team's been so good, and because in the history of the ownership of the Eagles is a dreadful one.
Yeah.
But still, I think he could be like, you know, a Jason Kelce type icon if he gave people a little bit more
of that personality.
Yes,
You're right. He does have like I mean this in a complimentary way, like a childlike wonderment about football.
Yeah.
Like he finds every facet of it so interesting. He also talked about dogs a lot in his enthusiasm for that. So shout out to him. I appreciated that. I told him afterward I appreciate the dog shout out. Before I give you guys my next big takeaway, I wanted to tell you we still have a couple tickets left for Fran's film session. It's on April 8th from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and you will get a chance to meet Connor Barwin. And this is an event in partnership with Connor Barwin's organization, Make the World Better. So yeah, like I said, a few more tickets left. Make sure to grab them before they're sold out. It's going to be a really great event. I'm sure you've got some good Connor Barwin stories, Les.
He was a great guy.
Yeah.
I wish when he went to the front office, I was thinking, hey, there's a source. But no, he's not interested in that at all. He doesn't want to.
I was going to say, yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah. He was great as a player for me, but not so much as a front office guy. He's very smart. One of the smarter people I've ever come across. Would make a very good mayor or
maybe that's in his future. He probably has his eyes on.
Well, his dad his dad's a city manager, and he comes from that background. Dad's managed a different Michigan and Florida cities. I did a story one time with his dad about that, but he has a lot of interest in those kinds of things. But he seems to be channeling himself more toward football. It'll be real interesting to see where he ends up there, because I don't think he's going to spend the next 20 years as kind of an adjunct front office guy.
I don't know what his path toward being a GM would be. I don't know either. Yeah, but I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, he's a sharp guy for sure if that's what he wants to do. All right, we're going to take our last break, and then on the other side, I'm going to give you one of my big takeaways, another vote of confidence that Jeffrey Lurie gave out yesterday. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this. All right, it's time to talk about staying in the game. If pain is slowing you down, knee, shoulder, back, whatever it is, you don't have to just deal with it. The team at Rothman Orthopedics has you covered. They've been recognized as the #1 physician practice in the country by Castle Connolly for having the most top doctors in orthopedic care. That's elite expertise, trusted nationwide. Getting started is easy. Head to rothmanortho.com/PHLY and schedule your appointment today. If you don't know what type of specialist to schedule with, you can use their Fast Scheduler program to quickly connect with their VIP scheduling team to get you set up with the appropriate specialist for your injury. And with Rothman now, you can get immediate access to orthopedic experts for guidance whenever you need. At Rothman Orthopedics, your mobility is their mission. You guys can book today at rothmanortho.com/PHLY and get back to doing what you love pain-free. Do you really want Jalen Hurts returning punts? What about Devontae Smith playing nose tackle? No, of course not. It's not worth the risk, the time, or the money. You keep your stars focused on what they do best, and the same idea should apply to your business. For small and mid-sized businesses, competing with bigger companies isn't about working harder. It's about working smarter. With competition heating up, you can't afford to fall behind, and AI goes way beyond ChatGPT. I know it can get overwhelming fast. That's why having a trusted guide like Togo matters. Instead of buying expensive AI tools, Togo helps you build exactly what you need at a fraction of the cost. Togo streamlines your operations by handling customer service, accounting, order management, logistics, admin, data entry, and even complex multi-step processes without the cost of building it all in-house. Every engagement starts with free process mapping, and Togo doesn't bill a dime until the real work begins. Programs start as low as $1,000 a month and are built to scale without breaking the bank. Visit Harness Togo and mention PHLY for a free operational assessment. All right, we are back on the PHLY Eagles podcast. You know, Les, when I was in Phoenix, are you a fan of the Citizen Public House, the place with the chopped salad?
I don't think I've been there.
Well, usually the staples that I go to when I'm there, it's the Citizens Public House, give them free advertising because they've got probably my favorite chopped salad anywhere. And then I like to get to In-N-Out Burger. I don't think In-N-Out Burger is like significantly better than the burger options we have here, but it's just different. It's kind of fun.
It is different.
And
there's a whole Western vibe. I don't think In-N-Out Burger would hit here like the way it does when you're out in the sun,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. That's a good observation. Like something about Five Guys just is like a good, hearty East Coast spot. So a lot of free advertising going on.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah,
really.
I had a favorite place out there, but it closed, so I don't feel bad about mentioning it. It was called Cowboy Chow. It was in Scottsdale. It was Chow was CIAO.
Nice, I like that.
But Damo would always complain because Paul Domowitch was a very meat and potatoes type guy, and Cowboy Chow was kind of a more evolved concept for Damo, and he never knew what he was eating and was always grumbling about it.
Yeah, he loved the Indianapolis trip because you could go to like 5 straight steakhouses.
Yes, exactly. Yes,
and
very straightforward.
I see Fran in the chat saying In-N-Out is overrated. I would agree with that sentiment. I don't think that In-N-Out is top 2 burger joint. That genre has some really good contenders, and I would not say that In-N-Out's in there. The biggest issue I have with In-N-Out, even though I was saying I wanted to go, I think it's fine, is that you have to like order so specifically. You have to like know like the secret menu. Yeah. But then sometimes if you order off the secret menu, like, oh, I want them animal style or I want them over hard, they like it. Sometimes it feels like they take it personally. And they are like, I will burn these fries because you said you want them over hard. Yeah. Like, you think my fries aren't cooked properly? Like, I'll show you. And it's too much of a moving target.
I was not aware of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's like a whole secret In-N-Out menu that's too tricky to nail down. So that's why you should just stick with Wawa and Rita's.
Yeah.
That's where you always know what you're going to get. Yeah. So, all right. So one of my other takeaways from Jeffrey Lurie's news conference, a vote of confidence for Nick Sirianni.
Yeah.
And I thought it was very noteworthy that he really pointed to the picture that Nick Sirianni has painted over his career, and especially over the last 2 years, rather than focusing solely on the way that last year ended. He says that Nick's performance has been nothing short of outstanding, one of the best first 5 years in the history of the NFL, 2 Super Bowls in the last 3 years, to your point, one of which we won, one of which was taken away from us, and I'm still bitter. And then he went on to say, nobody was more hurt by the losing in the Super Bowl or not making it to the Super Bowl, but he said, be realistic. The guy has done a great job. So I was very curious to hear what he said about Nick Sirianni. Again, like I feel like at the owners' meetings, you're kind of like listening out for tonal shifts. Mm-hmm. A lot of times you are going to hear like what they should say, but you want to be able to pick up on, what's the point of emphasis there? And I think organizationally there has been an effort to make sure to point out that Nick has been extremely successful and that he does more behind the scenes than people would give him credit for.
And this is the most exasperating part of the whole Nick Sirianni experience to me is obviously there's a lot more than we see in these press conferences.
Yes.
Because what we see in these press conferences is a junior high gym teacher. Yeah. I have never covered a coach who was more exasperating to cover than this guy. These 3-minute long answers that say nothing, and he gets asked about Jeff Stoutland, and it's like, oh yeah, all those guys that left, that's too bad. There has to be a lot more there, and obviously there is. Yeah, we just don't get it.
I completely agree with you, especially in this facet here. I think that Nick Sirianni is so focused on not giving up anything schematically that he oftentimes doesn't. He avoids explaining concepts and explaining
anything.
The fundamentals of football. He gets really down in the fundamentals about it. He was asked about tight ends and what they're looking for in the new system, and he basically just says, well, if you have a pass catching specialist who can't block, if you put him on the field, everyone knows you're passing. And it's like, I know.
Yeah, we know this.
Yeah, and I know for a fact from talking to players that he does have X's and O's savvy. He is a great teacher. He is able to communicate very well to a group about these very complicated concepts. I was on the phone with my dad on the way in here, and he's explaining to me, how motion affects combo blocks. Mm-hmm. And he's getting in the weeds about this stuff and all the terminology. I know that Nick Sirianni has 10 times, no offense to my dad, I know Nick Sirianni has 10 times the acumen to be able to explain those things. And he doesn't. He oftentimes avoids that. So for that reason, I do think from an outside perspective, you can think he doesn't have a good handle on these things. But I wish he was more insightful sometimes in those settings.
Even if it's not tactics, I'm glad I wasn't at the news conference late in the season last year. You guys had a Thursday game, and somebody asked him, Nick, what's your philosophy about Thursday games? How do you get the team ready? I'm never going to discuss with you guys. Seriously, dude?
Yeah.
You have a secret plan for getting ready for Thursday games that none of the other 31 teams is ever going to hit upon unless you give them the secret here in this press conference. Come on, man.
No, they have a firm belief that, and, I think the only defense I will offer for Nick Sirianni here is that I think that they are that maniacal about other coaches saying things in press conferences. Yeah. I think that they maniacally
pick to death every little.
They have someone listen to every word that they say. But I tend to agree with you. I'm not sure that explaining that you want a tight end that's strong at the point of attack is necessarily going to be giving up the ghost with your new offensive system.
Or what your practice thoughts might be about a Thursday freaking game.
Yeah.
People used to rail on Andy Reid.
Mm-hmm.
The league was a different place nearly 15 years ago when he left, but even Andy Reid you could get a better sense of things from that guy than you can this coach. And that having been said, tremendous coach, obviously wildly successful, but I hate listening to him talk. I do.
Well, I think he has changed a lot. We talked about it on, I think it was Monday's show, about how much Nick has changed over the years. And I think it's
for the worse.
I think it's fair to say that he has, I don't want to say beaten down by the job, because I think that's probably a little too negative.
Yeah.
I think the job has taken a toll on him. I think that
he has closed down. Yeah.
Yes, I think he has. Yeah, he is definitely less open and less. I don't know the right word for it. It's probably because I took the red eye in, and I'm finding it hard to find some of the words. But this is a different version of him that we are getting now, and I agree. I miss the version of him that had that wonderment, that enthusiasm about the game, at least publicly. I'm sure he still has it behind the scenes, but we have seen a very different version of Nick Sirianni, somebody who has had to endure these different waves of teams and things to overcome, and obviously they've had a lot of success. It's something that Jeffrey Lurie spoke about, is that the expectations in the building, around the building, in the fan base, they have ratcheted up so much that there is a lot of intensity around that team.
I wonder how it affects them. I really do, because I think they don't laugh it off. I mean, from what you've told me and other reporters told me, they were when those kids egged Kevin Petullo's house. That
absolutely
was the media's fault.
Yes,
No,
I mean, I obviously I disagree with that. I mean, it is an intense city. Maybe social media we could talk about, but in terms of the way that we've covered them, at least here, I feel like we're always balanced with the discussions we have. I mean, you think about the 30 minutes we did talking about Jalen Hurts earlier. That was a pretty nuanced conversation there. So
it was.
Yeah. Did you find it interesting that Jeffrey Lurie said he's more involved now than ever with the Eagles' day-to-day operation?
Yeah. Analytics was a tremendous thing for Jeffrey, because I think that really opened up. Many years ago, Jeffrey and Joe Banner were seen as these effete snobs, nerds, and the football guys in the organization didn't want anything to do with them. And I've told this story before, and I'll tell it again. I have to remember the guy's name now. When they were hiring Andy Reid, Jim Haslett. They also interviewed Jim Haslett. Jim Haslett was very close to Tom Modrak, who was the general manager. This is before I was covering the Eagles, but I've heard this story many times and told it many times. So Modrak wants them to interview Jim Haslett. They sit down with Jim Haslett, Jeffrey and Joe and Jim Haslett. And Jim Haslett starts telling them about how they're going to go sit in the corner. He's not going to brook any interference from these guys that don't know anything about football. And, he understands that's been a real problem here before.
Yeah.
And, if they're going to hire him, they better be ready for him and Tom to run things.
Yeah.
And so, he leaves the room, and Jeffrey and Joe look at each other and think, okay, Tom Modrak. And Tom Modrak was fired shortly thereafter, and they did not hire Jim Haslett. Yeah. But yeah, Jeffrey was seen as an outsider, I think even by Andy a little bit, you know. And over the years, it has evolved as analytics has pushed its way into football.
Yeah.
Jeffrey understands that part of it. Even if he was never a player, he can tell you the first time anything in the early years of that. He made a comment about Lito Shepherd once about giving up too much yards after catch. And Lito was like openly like, I've never heard of this. What the hell is he talking about?
Yeah.
I intercept passes and beat the Cowboys. Isn't that enough?
Yeah.
But that's always been Jeffrey's hobby horse. And he has ridden it into the center of, the football operation, and I think he's very comfortable there. Although he did talk a lot about Julian he got in some Julian stuff at the end about Julian's development and the people that he's
more
around.
And more of him, absolutely. Yeah. But I do think, and by the way, we are in overtime.
Sorry.
No, it's
I talk a lot.
No, it's fine, totally fine. I was going to say he talks about how you are seeing more and more of Julian, but I think Jeffrey believes that he's got a long time left being in this position and running things. So we'll see.
He's a good bit older than me, so we'll see. I mean, I hope so for both of our sakes, but I don't know about that. I mean, we'll see. In 5 years, Jeffrey's going to be like 80-ish.
He'll be 79, I think. Yeah.
So, I mean, Jerry Jones isn't doing too great in his 80s as a GM.
Well, that's a different job.
That
is a different job. I mean, Jeffrey said that he's up at 4 a.m. thinking, like, is it too early to text Howie about
a long snapper?
Yeah, the long snapper.
And I'm thinking BS. You're not. That's not what you might text him at 4 a.m. But it's not about
the long snapper. Yeah. Well, no, I found that interesting. Did anything else jump out to you about Jeffrey Lurie's news conference?
He talked about how tough it was to repeat.
Yeah.
But that they were the co-favorite. He kept going back to the fact that they went into the season the co-favorite. I don't think it set well with him that they lost in the wild card round of the playoffs. Obviously, I mean, it didn't sit well with us either. But I think he very clearly expected more out of that team while understanding the problems that fatigue and injuries created. They didn't have. It wasn't like the 49ers where they got 8 starters out.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily attrition on like the injury report. I think it was probably attrition like
mentally and emotionally,
and the way that the guys played.
Yeah.
But that is a good observation there. All right, well, this has been good. I had one more question for you that's totally unrelated. So I say news conference because of Jim Swan.
Okay.
That was like a big Inquirer copy thing. It's not a press conference; it's a news conference. Do you say press conference or news conference?
I think I use them interchangeably.
Okay, yeah.
I think I've heard that as well that was probably our style too at the Daily News.
Yeah.
But I don't really, I'm out of it for a while now, and I don't really think so much in style terms anymore. But that's a good, it is news because it's more than just, there is no press anymore practically.
Yeah. Shout out to Jim. So I always thought it was like, because it was shorter, just easier. More efficient.
And more accurate, yeah.
I think there are probably 20 people who found that part, this part of this conversation interesting. But I appreciate those 20 people.
I'll bring up one more in that vein. So among the people gleefully jumping on the Jalen Hurts controversy thing today was Chase Daniel on social media, who opined that their THEIR must be trouble in Philadelphia. Wonder if Chase actually graduated from the University of Missouri or not. I'm going to say not.
Yeah, he studied football, right? They don't pay. He didn't go there to play school, right? That's what he would say.
Guy was shorter than me. Spent a year as the backup quarterback. Really thought he was going to be the starter when they traded Sam Bradford.
Yeah.
He thought, well, Wentz is a rookie. Doug's my guy. I'll get to start some games now. 10 years later, he's still salty, it would seem.
Yeah, still nitpicking quarterback play. It's an interesting genre of social. There's a lot of interesting genres of social media these days.
Indeed.
Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for us at the PHLY Eagles podcast. I appreciate you, Les, for coming in and being. I think you lived up to the billing as the Jeffrey Lurie translator, and I think we had a good conversation about Jalen Hurts in there too. So thanks again for coming in. Appreciate it.
It was great.
Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you to Lindsay. Thank you to all of you in the chat. I will be back tomorrow talking draft, I think, and probably a couple other things. So like I said, thanks everybody for watching, and as always, we love you.
We all silly like the mayor.